All right, well, thank you. Welcome to the closing plenary of Summit 2019. I know that for many of you, you'll be participating in events tomorrow, so I want to remind people about the Can't Pass It On event at 1 p.m. tomorrow. It's taking place at here, in the hotel. Right here. Yes. Excellent. I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists in a second, but I want to start off by just reminding people that a key principle to CBRC's work is the importance of intergenerational education and learning. Before Grindr and Google and Pornhub, for centuries in fact, queer men talked to each other. We learned from our elders. It's how we survived, it's how we thrived despite overt oppression and violence. So it's fitting that we close our summit with some intergenerational reflections on our 20-year history. We'll hear from our elders, Rick Marchand and Terry Trussler, from our... And we'll also hear from two contemporary leaders, Michael Quagg and Thomas Trombetta. So Rick and Terry, we've got a couple of photos here, not to embarrass you, but we were hoping that you might be able to walk us through a bit of what was going on in 1999 other than the hair, what was going on in 1999 when you founded CBRC?
Okay, I'll start by reflecting that a lot of what we're seeing in this conference today didn't exist even as assumptions. Research in the community-based movement was unwelcome. It was a dirty word. Community-based organizations didn't want yet another thing to do. In 1998, the federal government changed its policy framework from health promotion, which had brought us along right through the whole AIDS epidemic, to population health, which was a whole new thing and very jarring. Also, the AIDS community was really quite burned out. There had been so many deaths. What you're seeing in there are a few of the people who survived, including me. We're just lucky enough to have survived, and we felt that even though there was great hope and optimism from the antiretrovirals that came in 1997, we felt that there was still change happening in the community. And one of the really big ones was that barebacking became a new fashion, given that the ARVs were successful, and that in itself was a huge change for us to try to get a grip on. In terms of HIV prevention for gay men, there was no funding left, there were no volunteers left, there were no youth involved in the programs. When population health came in, we thought, well, gay men are a population. We should be able to answer this. So we took this kind of idea to the federal government to sort of reframe the funding of HIV, and they rejected it. They rejected the idea of gay men's health. So this group of people, a bunch of survivors that were left in Vancouver, felt that we really needed to gain control of the means of knowledge production for gay men's health, because there really wasn't any good research on gay men's health, and that we would use community-based research as a way of developing our organization. And how about you, Rick? Over to you.
Yeah, I guess that's Paul Purcell there. I want to give a shout out to Bill Coleman. I don't know if he's still here, but he was one of the board members in that picture. Andrew Johnson, who's passed away now, but he went on to be executive director of AIDS Vancouver. And The youngest fellow there, Andrew Barker, is now the chair of CBRC. But in this period, 98, 99, we started meeting in 98 and didn't incorporate until 99. But every week, this group of guys would get together, literally over the kitchen table, to talk about the situation. And mainly it was because there was very little local research. And we were working in community organizations, and we didn't have any data to go on when we were supposed to develop programs, evaluate them, see what our progress is. There was nothing tangible. We were using mostly American data. The Center for Excellence was doing a study on young gay men Vanguard, but it was not community-based, and it was very hard to know how to respond to it. So we started meeting to think, well, what could we do about it? And that led eventually to the incorporation, which is happening here, of Community-Based Research Center. And
That's in our apartment, by the way.
yeah. So one of the first things I want to say that the board did was to establish a research ethics board. So here we are, a community organization. We've got researchers with PhDs wanting to do research, and we have no access to ethics review because we're not a university, we're not a hospital. And those in those days, and it's still really to a certain extent, control the ethics review processes in this country. What we did was we, got a guy, Russell Ogden, who's an expert in ethics, to chair. We set up a research ethics board at arm's length from the board, and put him as the chair, and then he recruited. And that was the only way then that we could get grants. Otherwise, it was just small, soft money that we could get. But if we were going to compete and get some grants, we needed to have ethics review. And so we've had that research ethics board. It just disbanded just 2 years ago because Terry's moved on and Nate's taken over. And what we learned is that the UVic is one of the best places in Canada universities for community-based research, and they really get it. So, our organization does not want to lose control of the Sex Now study. We want to make sure that we're directing that and controlling it. And you have to be careful working with universities that, this can happen. So this is still an issue, I guess, is what I want to say in the field, that other community organizations may want to hire their own researcher and do research, and really there's still the barrier of how do you get an ethics review. So we were in that state, but we were determined to do research, maybe gay health.
What prompted Sex Now in the first place is the hunches that the few of us had about the epidemic really isn't over, even though a lot of people have claimed victory. There was an almost doubling spike in HIV statistics in between 2000 and 2001. And the CDC got in touch with Rick and I to see whether we would do a survey to find out what the dynamics are that are causing this spike. And that's how Sex Now got started. We did it first at the request of the CDC, and they provided the funding for it. And then after that, we were on our own.
Yeah.
And it was our first application to the CHR to run a survey, and we got the grant, and that became the roots of the Sex Now survey.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you were planning the Sex Now survey, did you ever anticipate the response? What was your thinking around the Sex Now survey?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think
this was the 2002, the first one, so you sort of see the response. It was big.
because there was so little activity going on in the community, it was the feeling even of our funders in the CDC that, well, try out a survey, see if it goes, you might get a few hundred people responding. Well, we got about 1,700 in one day, at Pride in 2002, and it blew us away as much as everybody else.
So the whole idea that, then what was going around, that gay men are apathetic, they don't care about health or prevention and that, it's like, really, and we get this kind of response. So I think that, I guess we were determined at that point that we'll build our capacity no matter what. No matter whether we have funding or not, we're going to do a damn survey every year, because a periodic survey is needed in this country to know what kind of trends are happening. So that's, I guess, the journey we went on.
And then how long was it before you started taking Sex Now on the road? I think these images, for those of you who may be from other parts of British Columbia, you may recognize some of these parks and
This
prides.
is 2004. It's the CIHR funded survey, and we went to Prince George. We went to
Nelson, Kelowna, Nanaimo, Victoria, and Vancouver. In 2002, we went on our own to Prince George
And Victoria.
Victoria. So, dear Prince George, I was talking to guys from Prince George today, like, there's data back to 2002. We could do trends on Prince George because they've been in every survey. Yeah. So.
And then the last picture show I have is of a Totally Outright. You may recognize some faces in the top photo. This is the first class of Totally Outright. I think Michael Quagg might be 3 from the right, if you're curious.
Right.
Well, I think the first bit of analysis we did on Sex Now showed us that guys under 24 were seriously lacking in knowledge of sexual prevention and a lot of other things as well. And because there was very little community infrastructure left in that time, we thought something had to be done about this, and so we set up the Totally Outright program as a way of training youth to be involved in the kind of programming that was needed for that time, and it grew into a program that's spread around the country now.
Yeah, so 2005, we launched it. That's the first Totally Outright class. And in the evaluations, we could see what a difference it made, And then later we did some focus groups with guys that didn't take Totally Outright, and wow, just the difference. Suddenly, the guys taking Totally Outright were talking about social determinants of health and all of these ideas that, the guys that didn't go through Totally Outright were talking about condoms. Ask them about gay men's health. Condoms would be the first thing that would come up. So quite a difference.
And we should acknowledge Mike. Yeah. Mike was our community liaison person and coordinator of the program. He recruited all of the people that came into the program.
He recruited me.
And if I could just also add, at that time, they sucked me in. I knew nothing about HIV prevention or gay men's health or sexual health. And so, this was, it was an incredible opportunity. It was nothing short of transformational, in terms of taking someone who had just come out, had a really rough coming out experience, and being connected to all these leaders and being given the opportunities. Someone who wasn't a trained academic, but just was some guy who cared about these issues and wanted to do something about it. So I owe a lot to Rick and Terry for that opportunity.
Yeah. I know we heard about the Sex Now survey this morning from Nate. Thank you for that. Obviously, we're very proud. But we did want to just talk about sort of a current state of where CBRC is now. It's no secret that we're transitioning from...
Jody, could I just say something on the summit?
You can, of course, of course.
Because I guess we started in 2005. There were no meetings. People did not get together like this at all. And so, one of the things we saw is we need to be getting together. How can we plan and talk about things and know what's going on? So I just want to say that, the first one was very small in that, and there was a vision. And when I walked into this room yesterday and saw the crowd, that was the vision. Like, wow, clinicians, researchers, community people, like, this is the way we should be operating if we're going to make progress on the epidemic, I think.
We started it with near 40, and the tally for this conference comes to nearly 300, or over 300.
Over 300.
Over 300.
So, Michael, you've been instrumental in the current state of CBRC in having a vision for CBRC as a national organization with a national mandate. It was your vision that originally started the Alliance. And so do you want to walk us through a little bit of, I mean, this is a Sex Now slide. It shows how we've grown from a regional agency that used to do a couple of Pride festivals in BC to a more national one. But do you have anything to say about that?
Sure, thanks, Jody. And I think Nate did a really good job of, just talking through how Sex Now, as a research project, has provided a platform for us to really expand the local, provincial, regional partnerships that have really helped make Sex Now the amazing project that it is, and it's continuing to sort of grow and diversify. And I just love this picture because it sort of reflects the growing sort of movement and the growing partnerships that really make Sex Now possible. And sort of just thinking about sort of how Sex Now has evolved, and just the first few slides of the slide deck to where it is now. I mean, Sex Now has been online and national for 10 years now, but it's only really been in the last few years as part of the national expansion that's allowed CBRC and all of the partners working with us to not only expand the scope of the study and the data collection, but also the analysis. And none of that's really possible without the support and involvement of all the partners.
Thanks, Michael. Thomas, you sort of represent the new school of CBRC, and you work out of an Edmonton office, which is a new office for us as a result of our Community Alliance partnership. How did you get involved in CBRC, and what are your thoughts?
I started in 2016. I graduated with sociology from the vibrant metropolis of Camrose, Alberta. About 18,000 people live there. Great place to come out. Very conservative, but I knew I wanted to work with queer stuff right from the get-go. As soon as I came out, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be it, right? I know it. So when I moved to Edmonton, actually, from Camrose, the first thing that I did was be part of Totally Outright. That was the first weekend that I ever spent in Edmonton, was in that HIV Edmonton room, learning about social determinants of health, syndemics, intersectionality, all those fun things. And then the next year, I was volunteering with Totally Outright, and the year after that, I was organizing Totally Outright. And then this year, we're working with a national group that is developing a Totally Outright curriculum in collaboration due to the Alliance and due to all these methods for connection, that we are creating these suites of and these programs that are being done regionally, right? Which I find so stunning, because we're not having a program that's being developed somewhere that is being, across the board the same thing. We're having groups and partners across the country, across Turtle Island, that are helping and that are shaping those to regional contexts, right? And that's, I think, where Sex Now also comes from, and owning those means of knowing really allows us to dig very, very deep. And I think it's because we have so many people across the country that we are able to have both some consistency, right, but also those very, very important local adaptations. I know in Edmonton we have a very, very particular context, and so does every region. So I think, I'm gonna go back and say 3 years ago was also my first summit. This is my third summit, and the thing that stood out to me the most was the fact that I thought that I was doing this work very siloed, right? Especially in Alberta and the Prairie, such a decentralized health system. I'm like, I am finally meeting other people who are, volunteering or getting paid to do this work, and they exist, and they are professional, queer people that are amazing. That to me was what jumped out, because it seemed like we're all doing work alone. And it seems very much like in this third year, to see the amount of people here and to see the places that you all represent is it's always what jumps out, is that we're not really doing this. We're borrowing from each other, and we're collaborating, and we're just adapting regionally. So really thankful for all the knowledge and things that have been shared in this summit. Continues to surprise me every year. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Thomas. In September, after a year of consultation, the board approved the following strategic directions for CBRC. And so, in addition to our many work plans, these strategic directions will be going on in the background, and we're going to be accountable to them. We've made space in our board meetings where we will report on them regularly, and so it will be my job to work with the staff to see these come to fruition, and then report back to the board and to you folks annually. The first is around our commitment to truth and reconciliation, and I'm hoping that we've demonstrated at least some of that this summit. But by making it a strategic priority, it ensures that we are accountable and that we revisit our efforts regularly. Michael, can you walk us through number 2 and 3?
Sure. So just quickly around public political action and advocacy, it's really hard to, I think we all recognize that it's really hard to get the change that we really want to see, whether that's around HIV or STBBIs or mental health and substance use access or conversion therapy or other intersecting structural issues like racism, transphobia, and ableism. It's really hard to do all of that if we're not getting the attention of policymakers, of politicians, and of course the broader public. So, gatherings like, this summit, I mean, it's always been important, but I think, thinking about our strategic directions and using, really leveraging platforms and conferences like this to make sure that we are, staying true to our work in bringing together researchers and community stakeholders and clinicians and other folks that are working on the front lines. But we also need to make sure that we're using these opportunities to mobilize the evidence, make sure that, our realities are being sort of being communicated to those who have the opportunity and the resources to affect that kind of change that we need to see. So, yeah.
Okay. And Thomas, how about number 4, addressing, oh, sorry, Michael. You
well,
can talk about number 4.
Just maybe real quick, just so, I think I mentioned this around 6 now, and just circling back to Nate's presentation, but I mentioned that it's evolved considerably over the years. And I think the main thing to say is that the expansion and the better resourcing of Sex Now has helped CBRC expand what we are able to do. I mean, things like, helping to inform the changes to the blood ban and, positioning Sex Now as a really critical source of data to inform how that should look like. Having 9% of our sample in our 2018 sample being represented by Indigenous and Two-Spirit folks, all of that is possible only through the additional resources that we've had just in the past few years, and we're really excited to see where that takes us next.
Thanks. And Thomas, the final strategic direction around addressing health beyond HIV?
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm a big fan of always exploring complexities about issues, right? I am of the belief that if we are simplifying issues that are complex, like power, like health, like oppression, we're really doing a disservice to those topics, right? Because they don't express themselves in simple and direct ways in life. They're messy, they're complicated, and it's gonna take a lot of freaking effort to understand what we're talking about. And the same thing with HIV. I find a lot of the conferences on HIV are getting less and less about HIV, which I think is really important because truly there is no HIV work without anti-poverty work, right? We can't advocate for folks to be on HIV treatment if folks are worried about being homeless or food security. There is no HIV work without having intersectional talks about disability, race, gender, or even without including and making more intentional efforts to include trans and non-binary people. Those don't exist separately. They're always going to be part of the same issue. So I think that within our conversations, making them complex and making them about the entire health is both difficult because it really doesn't allow us to focus just on HIV, which would be much simpler, but it's also a huge benefit because then it allows us to understand the true complexity of what we're talking about. And by understanding that, we can start slowly getting to those roots and understand what the work means, right? Because oftentimes, working with HIV is not just giving workshops and talking about, condoms, is doing work in the grounds about anti-poverty, anti-racism, and making sure those conditions are there for people to succeed. So I really do think that speaking about holistic health in ways that go beyond just your sexual health, but encompass a variety of topics is necessary at this point when speaking about HIV or really any other health issue.
All right. Well, our time on this stage and in this place is coming to an end. But I want to end with one question for each of you, which is, what's your hope for the queer men's movement and/or CBRC? Somebody want to start?
I can start. I mean, just to build on what I was saying, I think we've experienced a tremendous growth, just within our organization, but also externally within the environment, within the sector, and that's really great to see over the last few years. I'm really excited to see what comes out of that. I think we've been really investing on trying to create the right kinds of partnerships, to approach our work very thoughtfully and intentionally. And I actually don't think that we've fully seen the fruits of that labor and that investment just yet. And I'm really excited for us to continue that process, to continue to center voices and communities that traditionally have not been able to have a voice in this work. And so my hope is that we're going to continue to be able to do that and improve on that.
Thanks, Michael. Terry?
Well, just listening to Thomas makes me feel so glad that we invested in youth, because they know what to do now. I don't. And I just think that that investment of youth needs to continue. It's so great to see so many generations all in this room. And I really think that the continued investment in youth development would be really a great sign to see for the future of the CBRC.
I just want to build on that for 1 second. As an executive director who started this role 2 years ago, I came in at the beginning of a funding cycle. CBRC was growing from an agency of 2.5 to an agency of 17. Most leaders would have wanted to hang on and to be around to see, and to take credit for that growth and to really, see the fruits of your labor. And you two didn't. You stepped aside for a new generation to take over the organization. And certainly we appreciate your advice, and I meet with you folks regularly, but you didn't continue to try to take up that space. You've been very intentional about that, and it's made, my job as a new executive director to come on that type of a cycle as opposed to the end of a cycle when there is no money and everyone's looking for funds. It certainly made life a lot easier for me, and so thank you. Rick, any comments?
Well, there was a document done in 98, 99 called Valuing Gay Men's Lives. And, it was a national policy document put together by gay men to sort of transition from HIV into the broader health context. And it was rejected by Health Canada, who was in charge at that point. No way, we're not doing that. We're sticking to, HIV. Well, I think it's kind of time for a new policy document to sort of, get arranged. It's sort of encouraging that I think the Parliamentary Committee on Health looked at LGBTQ health issues and produced a report. So maybe from that, there could be a new initiative to sort of develop a policy document around, gay men's health or queer men's health, that, update this to something that's more showing the reality of what's going on. That would be my hope, one of them.
We'll put that on the to-do list. Thank you.
Big pressure to end this panel and the weekend. I would say, everybody here knows that our categories of gender, categories of race, more and more we are unlearning, right? We're unlearning what we thought was common assumption. I think we're always, learning is easy. We learn how to learn from a very young age, but we don't learn how to unlearn from a very young age. And I think now in this position, we're doing a lot of unlearning about what those categories of gender really mean, right? Are they truly valid? Maybe for some people, maybe for some not. What those categories of intersectionality really mean, but more so, how do we apply those things in our practice? So in terms of what I want to see, I think is just taking the harm reduction approach, right? Who needs it the most? And making sure that our efforts are really localized in that. Because if we are preaching to the choir, we're really not doing our job in reducing harm. We can't keep talking about PrEP to gay white men that are cis, and those things, those conversations have to change. So I'm really, really excited to see how the CBRC adapts and how the CBRC comes up with innovative and creative ways to talk about health and sexual health that does target those who need it the most. Because so far, I've loved what I've seen, so I'm excited to see what's going to come up next.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. Okay, so it's 5:10. Michael's telling me something. I don't know quite what he's
just a
saying.
couple of.
Oh, yeah. And so, a few minutes of housekeeping, and then we'll let you enjoy your Friday evening. First of all, please return your SI headsets if you haven't done so already to reclaim your identification. There will be an evaluation that will be circulated. It's an anonymous evaluation survey. It's super important. It's how we get funding. It's how we prove that this was a valuable experience. I am guilty for never filling out evaluations. Please don't be like Jody. Fill out your evaluation. It's good for us, and it's good for you because we can keep doing these things. It will be through Eventbrite, and if you haven't noticed, we really do listen. This summit evolves every year. We have changed it numerous times. We don't take anything for granted. We revisit every decision every year, and so we read those evaluations and we take them to heart. I want to thank everyone who participated, who presented, who traveled from afar. Thank you. To our community partners, thank you, merci. To our funders, government and corporate, thank you. To presenting sponsor Vive Healthcare, thank you for your continued support. To the staff and volunteers at CBRC, you're the hardest working team in show business. I love you guys. A special shout out to Michael Quagg, Jose Patino Gomez, and Keith Reynolds. They've been working their butts off to ensure we all have a good summit, and I think it shows, so thank you. And thank you, everyone. That's a wrap for 2019. We do have an announcement. Sorry. There is a trans rally that's happening, and we want to give a little bit of space.
Yes. So, Transphobia continues. Megan Murphy, who spoke and was stopped at speaking at UBC, is supposed to be speaking tomorrow. For those of you who are in town, she was supposed to be speaking at SFU Harbor Center. She's a so-called feminist transphobe. And so SFU's canceled the rally, not because of transphobia, because there might be some security issues, so they're still being transphobic. But they've got a new venue, so the rally is still going to be happening tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And you can go to the Coalition Against Bigotry Pacific to update where the rally is going to be. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next year.
But I feel like when people just deliver the news, they pretending to